This is a recording of Ann Tabor talking about Alpena's past, recorded February 12th, 1978.
Okay, is everybody gathered? I guess so. I'm Ann Tabor. For those of you who don't know, not talking again too well, but I'll struggle through if you'll bear with me. Somebody slopped my water already. I love that glass. Well, I want you to observe that I do, on rare occasion, outline a speech. You want to bet I don't stick with it? Well, at least I have a something to fall back on, right? If worse comes to worse here. Had a lady ask me, I don't know whether she's here now or not, asked me when, I think she is, when, it was after the second one, I believe, or the first one, possibly, when I had made the statement that I think Alpena is an entirely unique town. There's none other like it any place for its size, circumstance. And afterwards, she came up and asked me, she said, I'm new in town. I don't know too much about it, so what makes you say that Alpena is unique? And I gave her a very inadequate answer because I was all through talking at the moment, as I get very quickly these days. And it made me think, well, in the first place, I always forget how much time has gone by since the many years ago that I used to do these programs on the radio. And sort of inundated, I felt, everybody in the place with Alpena history. But my goodness, that's been a long, long time ago. Seems like only yesterday to me, but it has been more than 20 years. Whole new audience, whole new batch of people in town who don't know anything about it from the beginning. So forgive me if today I go over some of the things that perhaps are very familiar to a lot of you, but in the hope that there are some of you who don't know a lot about the town's beginnings, except very vaguely, possibly. Why is Alpena unique, or why do I say it is? I can't document that right straight down, so it has to be my own opinion, but I'm sure I'm right. Well, there are a lot of reasons, and let me go over this real quickly so that you know how I get off the track, and then I'll go back and get off the track, okay? In the first place, we were a lumber town. There were a lot of lumber towns. But we were different, not in the beginning. We were like every other lumber town, Black River, Rogers City, Sheboygan, all of the other towns along the coastline of Michigan, where they came to get the lumber. They didn't think it was worth anything else. We were built to not live. We were built to be a temporary town. Who cared what happened as long as we got the wood that we were after? Then let it die. Who cared? They were up here just for the money. It's land that nobody wants anyhow. And then by sheer accident, by sheer coincidence, I call it a miracle, we lived because of a strange circumstance. The cement coming into play just exactly at the right time in our history, and we were on our way out. It picked us up, kept us alive, and eventually we grew again. It started as a short-lived lumber town by a man principally by one man, who never lived here himself. That in itself is strange. It started on land that nobody wanted. They tried to give this land away to the surveyors who came up here in 1839 and 40. D.B. Oliver was one of them. And another one of those early surveyors, it is said, although there are some people who claim to be able to disprove this, and I'm grabbing for the name right now, and it's in the back of my mind, and I can't get it, who was Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederacy, later, 20 years later, was among those early surveyors. He was one of the ones of the teams that went up to Presque County, northern part of Alpena County and Presque County. It is said, who designed the lighthouse at Presque, the old lighthouse. There are two of them. One of them is ancient, about 1839-40. The other one is not exactly young, I think 1872, so we call them the old lighthouse and the new old lighthouse. Those surveyors who came here were offered in lieu of payment, and they had probably earned, what was the going rate, $1 a day? They had probably earned $100, a little more, a little less possibly, for each summer's surveying. Couldn't survey in winter. Instead of paying them the cash, the government offered to give them, each of them, any township of land that they wanted. Now, those are geographic townships, you understand, not Long Rapids, Osney, townships like that, political townships. Geographic townships, 36 sections of land. I'll bet they kicked themselves afterwards. They could have had that free, instead of the $100. All of them said, who wants it? Nothing up here but trees and Indians, rocks. Who wants it? We'll take our $100. And they did. So it was land that nobody wanted, and yet look what we have. And it was started by those with absolutely no knowledge of how to start a county, how to start a town. That wasn't their basic purpose. Just, put up something to live in, make out as best you can while we're cutting the wood, and then we'll be gone. They started out with people who found out that they had to develop a county here. They had to conform, but no place could they go down and buy a how-to book, how to start a county in 6 easy lessons. It was something they'd had no experience with. How many people do? And so they did a lot of dumb things right off the bat. I'll tell you about more of that in a minute. It was started as a short-lived town, one of the last places on the Huron Shore to be settled. Do you realize that? Mackinac was a going concern long before Alpena was ever thought of, naturally, back in the early days of New France, back in the fur trading days, Bay City was going. They were coming up the shore, and Sheboygan got started. They were coming down the shore. We were about in the middle, about the last of the places to be developed. Thunder Bay Island was going strongly, long before anybody ever thought that you could live on the mainland here. And we'll get to that again, too. It's a unique town in that miraculous development of cement that saved our bacon at the end. Nobody had paid any attention to all the rock here except to cuss it out a lot when they tried to farm. Rock, every place you looked, they had no idea how much there was. Oh, occasionally they'd get a brief glint of how much rock there was when they tried to drill for wells, when they tried to drill down for a salt brine well and got the Stinky Spring downtown instead. The rock was pretty thick. But nobody knew that rock was going to mean more to them money-wise than all of the timber that they'd cut off. They had no suspicion. And then they found out just at the right time in our history, when we were on our way out, when the mills were closing, people were leaving town, the population was starting to nosedive from a town almost as large as it is now in the late 1880s and early 1890s. It was starting to go down, and then 1899, that miracle of cement. A lot of people perhaps don't realize, you do if you read literature from calcite, but who does, that there are three circumstances about the limestone. This is what I drill into my kids all the time. Three circumstances about the limestone here in Alpena County and Presqu'Île and other places, but here it's sticking right up at us, that make it possible for us to have become the cement capital of the world. One is, it's pure. The limestone was formed at the bottom of the ocean that covered us here at one time, before the glacier swept over us 4 times. It was an ocean, and it was fed by streams that came down off the old mountains. First the Laurentians, way up on the top of the Canadian Shield, and then the Killarneys. And at one point in time, the waters were sweeping over a particular formation that brought down with those waters calcium carbonate, that's lime, and deposited it in a layer on the bottom of that ocean. In that ocean were a lot of animals, a lot of deep sea life, all peculiar to warm tropical oceans, colony coral, call them Petoskey stones today, all kinds of warm water tropical life. And all of them were shelled animals, and so they ate all that calcium carbonate they possibly could, the poor little dears. But you can only carry so much of that junk around on your back. So a lot of the calcium carbonate fell to the bottom of the ocean in the form of lime mud. The little animals lived and died. They lived, got married, had kids, built more apartments, like the Petoskey stone. All this limestone, used every bit of it they could. And as they died, they fell to the bottom, and their shells joined the calcium carbonate that was already there. And we were beginning to get quite a deep group of calcium carbonate lime on the bottom of the ocean. And then the weather changed quite drastically. It got terribly cold. And the glaciers hit. One after the other, they swept over us here. And here, on the rim of that saucer of limestone, saucer-shaped, it's right through the state, but in the center of the state, the middle part of the saucer, the glacial till, the junk that the glaciers snow-plowed here, collected deeper so that the limestone is buried there. But here on the edge, and over on the other edge of the state too, on Lake Michigan shore, the glaciers cleaned everything off and left the limestone outcroppings, so it was quite obvious to everybody. That ocean must have been pretty clean, and the calcium carbonate must have not been combined with too many other minerals when it came down and got deposited, because our limestone here is as pure as you will find any place in the world. Looks like dirty old rock to me, but it's pure limestone, just exactly right for making cement. No place else in the world will you find any more pure. There are other places that have it, not too many, but no place is it any better than it is here. Second circumstance, it's sticking right out at us. We don't have to mine for it. All we have to do is go crack it off. We don't have to dig for it. Sticking right out in a huge quarryable thickness that will not be exhausted for a long, long, long time. And the third circumstance, all has happened. The purity and the easy to quarry happened right on the edge of the biggest transportation system in the world, the Great Lakes. Now, if any one of those three circumstances about our limestone were missing, we wouldn't be here at all today. The town wouldn't be here. The cement industry would have gone elsewhere, probably Rogers City, possibly the other side of the state. A lot of people don't realize that how unique that situation is. Of course, we have evidence of the limestone formation here, and I don't mean to be getting into Mr. Loomis's field here, but we have evidence of the limestone formation here in the sinkholes that we have, as a lot of you are now familiar with. You know, one of the first classes I had, oh Lord, how long ago was that, 5 years? I asked a whole class, in fact, 3 classes full of kids, one morning, and there were about 40 kids or a little more in each one. How many know what's a sinkhole? It was only about 5 years ago, and 2 kids raised their hand in that whole batch, and they were Boy Scouts who had been on a field trip. Kids didn't even know what the sinkholes were, and here we're living with them. Do you know there are only 4 places in the entire world where limestone sinks like ours occur? Czechoslovakia, France, where the prehistoric caves were discovered, Mammoth, Kentucky, where they've got quite a group of caverns, I understand, and Alpena, Michigan, where we've done nothing with them. I keep proposing to my kids in school that we go out and blast the back end of some farmer's field in Long Rapids, see what we can open up. I'm convinced there's a much larger cavern system under us than in Mammoth, Kentucky. But then again, do we want a tourist attraction like that? Sure, why not? What the heck? Anyhow, the limestone, somebody's going to make it off something. We might as well get in on it. The limestone here is symbolized by those sinkholes, because they can only occur, those kind can only occur in limestone, where the underground rivers are eating away, and they're like little worms going through an apple, eat and eat and eat, and sometimes they eat a big enough hole so that there's not much top left, and down goes a sinkhole. And most of the waters we now know from the underground river system, which must be terribly, terribly expensive under us, come out in Misery Bay, in the hole in the lake in Misery Bay. For years and years and years, I'm going to pass this thing around. It looks like I'm in school. Look at Kevin. You have never seen this before, of course. There are 2 pictures there from an airplane. One as you approach Misery Bay and you see nothing but little keyhole-like Misery Bay. And the next one, you're right on top, and boy, there is a hole in the lake, and there's no kidding about that. I had never seen it before, and I don't think you can see it till you're in an airplane. For years, I'd been reading Mr. Dewey. Darn, I was going to talk about him today. I forgot to bring the notes. Oh, maybe I can remember him. Superintendent of schools here.
Perhaps had more time later to spook around, and it was he who discovered so many of the sinkholes and came up with the theory of how they...
He was right, so we had no way of knowing. And he came up with the idea that all those sinkholes that he'd found seemed to occur in a pattern. They sweep down from Shupak over in Montmorency, down through Presqu'île County at Sunken Lake, Fletcher Park, down around Long Lake, and over to Misery Bay. And in an old book that he wrote, which perhaps Mr. Loomis told us about, I don't remember, an old book that Professor Dewey wrote, so the kids in school would have a textbook to go by on the geology of Alpena County. He described a little bay that he had found, and he called it Misery Bay, a bay that he had found in which was this deep sinkhole where the waters came spewing out, tide rose 8 feet every 20 minutes, and he described it as being almost landlocked, a little round bay, or a little bay that had just a narrow outlet out to the main lake. Well, I look on the map, I see Misery Bay, where Bob Scott put it on his engineering map, and I thought, well, that ought to be right. Misery Bay is just a big thing, you know, El Cajon, El Cajon, I'm supposed to say. I can't change now after all these years, El Cajon. And let the chips fall where they may. I looked and looked, and I could not find anything that resembled Misery Bay, and then when I flew over it, there it was. But it's not where it is on the map. It's Little Misery Bay, and it's Olson's Fishery, and it's right out. Go through the cement plant and keep on going till you drop in the lake, and that's where you are, at the hole in the lake. But it's really quite astounding what is there. Geological wonders that people come from all over to explore, and we sit here knowing in the middle of all of it. What a shame. And I hope to change every kid in Alpena and make them real excited about being rock hounds and exploring some of these marvelous things that we have right here in the county. So that's another reason it's unique. Our geological formations that led us to still being here because of cement coming along at exactly the right time to replace the trees which we had managed to exhaust in a terrifically short time, considering they were doing everything without mechanical processes then. It's unique also in that the way the town grew, the social aspect of it, the way the town grew, has made it completely different than a lot of towns. These facts combined with the others that I'm mentioning, put together, give us that uniqueness. That social aspect that I'm referring to is the fact that, you know, in most small towns, when you go through, you ever notice when you're traveling through little bitty towns, smaller than ours possibly, you can always spot the banker's house and possibly the doctor's house. You know, there's always one or two big houses, big old houses. There's always one or two affluent families in a town like that. And the rest of them are just, you know, also-rans. The more important people, I think, are the also-rans. But in Alpena, it was a lot different. A lot different. We didn't have one or two affluent families. We had a dozen, at least, or more. People who made tremendous fortunes out of the lumber that was here and some of the side industries that went on with it back in those old days. We had a moneyed strata socially that was quite tremendous. Millions, you know, more money was taken out of Saginaw Valley in wood than was ever realized out of California in the gold rush. Tremendous fortunes were made, and a lot of them right here in Alpena, and you can see it all around you. Well, a lot of the money's still here, but you can see the homes that they built. Those big old mansions, some of which have fallen into more or less disrepair now, but many of them still here, still in good shape and being restored, thank goodness, by a lot of people. I wish more people would or could, but it takes money. So you were either part of that tremendously wealthy class of people here, and then there was a vast expanse of nobody and nobody at all, and then down to us ordinary folks, you know. And of course there were more of those ordinary folks, but there wasn't much in between. I have a couple of stories to tell you in a minute that will show what I mean. It is a unique town in something I've mentioned before, the nationality polarization that occurred here, the way people immigrated into the town, the way the groups came from Europe to settle in Alpena, and why they came. First, you have the state of Mainers. That's what State Street is, you know, State of Main Street. It is officially State of Main Street, a founding factor today. Those were English, of course, Episcopalian. For the most part, they were. And then another large group came to work in the mills and to work in the lumber woods. A lot of the Polish people came at that point. Those who didn't go up into Presque Isle County to Homestead later came to work in the tanneries that were here. There were 2 tanneries. And the Poles were real good leather people, had a lot of training, a lot of background for that, good craftsmen. The Germans, of course, came in a group, most of them to Homestead, but they ended up working in the woods too, so that they get their homesteads going. They were farmers, fleeing the wars in Europe that had left them penniless, landless, although many of them had been very affluent over there. A lot of professional people among them, the well-educated people. Everything taken away from them by the Junkers in the vast wars that went on. The Norwegians came and stuck together. Probably the only town in the world that had 3 Catholic parishes in a town of 2,000 people, when not everybody was Catholic, most of them, but not everybody. But as I have mentioned before, we didn't have St. Mary's and St. Bernard's, St. Anne's. No, we had the French church, the Polish church, and the German church. And then if you were Lutheran, you either went to the Norwegian church or the German church. I should have said Irish, but Catholic, not German. Always the churches in early history were mentioned according to their nationality, not according to their denomination. You couldn't tell whether they're Catholic or Lutheran or what. They were just mentioned by their nationality groups. And that polarization hung in here for a long, long time. You had the Northsiders, mostly Polish, and then you had people over here on this side. And out in the country, they stuck to townships, Lear, Norwegian, Scottish in Long Rapids, Germans in Wilson. That stayed with us a long time, and there are still remnants of it with us, I do believe. So that has made the town unique. It's unique in that it's a town that was almost completely isolated from the beginning, and that's a situation that existed for a long, long time. There was only one way in and out of here for a long time, and that was by boat. And as you know, the lake freezes up now and again for a considerable length of time. And you got here in the fall or the summer, and if it froze, here you stayed till the next spring, and the lake broke up. And if you ran out of flour, tough. A lot of times they ran out of things in those early years. Lots and lots of times, because they couldn't predict how many mouths they'd have to feed. The town was pretty well isolated, yet it continued to to fight for its existence because they weren't here too long before they realized they wanted to stay. Something about Alpena hooks you. I'm not a native of the town, but I consider it my home now, and I can't imagine living anyplace else. I wouldn't want to. Oh, I'd like to get out of here in the winter now and again and hope to arrange that before too many years. Sheesh, I get sick of it, don't you? This time of year especially. You think spring will never come, you forget what a leaf looks like, you know? Can't imagine it with the grass instead of tons of snow. Yet it makes spring all the better when it does get here, I guess. But there's something about Alpena that, and the surrounding countryside, that hooks you. No doubt about it. Kids say, oh, I can hardly wait to get out of here. Look how many come back to stay, if they even leave at all. I wish that we had more for them to stay for. Maybe we will. Maybe we will. But they found, those early lumber people that came here, that though they had started the town with no idea of living here the rest of their lives, push on to the lumber, right on across the country if necessary, following the trees, hacking them down as they went. No thought to the future whatsoever. Well, I guess we are guilty of that too in other areas. But then they decided they wanted to have a town here. They wanted it to live. They started building their big homes, and they started trying to organize the town a little better. They wanted it to live, and live it did, through the greatest of all odds. The things that happened to this town you would not believe. Well, the ruggedness of the country was one thing for those very early pioneers. It was tough going, very tough going. There were fires that incessantly burned the town down. They shook off the ashes and built the blasted thing again. I don't know how they had the courage. In 1871, the north side burned, every bit of it, right to the ground. Well, it wasn't too much of it, you know, but it was still a fire that covered 2 blocks or so, covered a big territory, burned everybody out completely. I told you about Sam Boggs. He got burned out in that one. He went across the river and built another hotel. The next year, the south side burned out. That was a real blinger. That one covered about 3.5 square blocks, 68 buildings, 2.5 hours, nothing left. Nothing left but the smoking remains. And it was nothing to have one block burn out. That was considered a minor occasion. 1888, it happened again, the north side. Clean sweep from the Besser plant right over to the bay, took the Gilchrist lumber out, burned itself out in the lake. Took everything in its path, churches, schools, lots and lots of homes, hundreds of them. And still they built again. We couldn't do it. We wouldn't do it now, I don't think. We'd be too discouraged. Move on, forget it. But not these early Alpena folks. They were a tough bunch. And they built you a town, and they kept it alive for you against all odds. And another problem that they had was the population growth. The way it mushroomed, and they hadn't counted on that. Consider the problems that they faced with a population that was going like this. In 1860, there were only 190 folks here, and that was counting the whole county, and I think they pushed a few stumps over to find an occasional Indian to come up to that, with that 190. 10 years later, 1870, 2,700, from 190 to almost 3,000 people. Well, that's counting the whole county, too. As a matter of fact, it counted Montmorency County and Fresquillo. They were attached to us politically at that time. But there weren't too many folks up there, so it really didn't make that much difference in the figure. It's still a pretty true figure for Alpena. 1874, 4 years later, there were 4,000 people, and all of them right here in the city. By now we had city census only. 4,000. That's coming from less than 2,000 for the whole county, 3 county areas, as a matter of fact. 1880, 6,000. 4 years later, 9,000 in our city. 1894, couldn't find a figure for 1890. 1894, in our city, 12,000 people. In 10 years, from 9,000 to over 12,000, and by this time 17,000 in Alpena County. By 1900, it was down to 11,000. It had started down. The mills were closing. The timber was gone. They'd even been hauling it down from Georgian Bay in big bag booms, trying to keep the mills going here, but it wasn't working. The mills were closing, and the end was in sight, and they were getting desperate. They put out all kinds of pamphlets and things, trying to get people to come, Chamber of Commerce, just as we do now, trying to get industry up here. They succeeded. They got some industries to come. Fletcher Paper Company started. That was a good deal, 1886. The railroad finally got here, 1886, just in time to watch the town die. Just about. Took them 30 years to get the railroad here, and that was just about 20 years too late, really, to keep the town going. The problems that must have arisen with all those people coming in, how to house them, you know, how to get water to them, and they had city water by then, the electricity, how to keep up. Imagine what the taxes must have been. I wonder how they arranged all of that, where the money came from, to do everything that had to be done to house a population that was growing to that extent. It's a wonder we've got anything here at all, and that it's in any order at all. So that's why I say Alpena's unique. It's unique in that it lived through all of that, for one thing, you know. Now, let's go back and do some more of it. Now that I've managed to get through my whole outline, I'm so proud of myself. Organization. Can't stand it. The land no one wanted, I told you about. Okay. Those who started it had no knowledge of how to start a town, right? Do some of you realize that the throes that they had to go through to get the county started? Another unique thing about us, we're the only county in the history of the world, certainly in Michigan, that has 2 laws on the books making it a county because they goofed. Well, you see, the city fathers, the 4 of them, there were 4 partners. Fletcher had half of it, and Lockwood had the other half. And he sold part of his half to Oldfield and Minor. So there were 4 of them involved, but Fletcher owned the greatest percentage of it in the beginning. And the 4 of them came here. I told you about, those of you who were here, about how they got here that night and weren't feeling any pain at all, tried to raise the flag. Only flag they had was Fremont for president flag, so they got that one up and named the place Fremont. That very evening they laid out the first street. Got to do something ceremonial. Got to do this first night. There were no condition. They laid out River Street, and it's crooked to this day, you know. Never did go back and change that. Well, they hadn't really gotten fully sobered up, I think, when there was a boat appeared down there at the river. Lo and behold, the tax collector from Sheboygan County with his handout for $500, please, or was it $300? I don't care. It was more money than they wanted to pay. We were attached to Sheboygan County for political purposes. An unorganized county is always attached to the nearest one that is organized and has the government going. And that was Sheboygan. They're older than we are by quite a few years. So Sheboygan was, oh, look, folks, down there at Alpena, we'll go down and crack them for some taxes, you know. Of course, it was supposed to be tax money to improve Alpena County, but you can be sure we never saw a cent of it. And so the boys put their heads together and said, now this can't happen again. What will we do? This was 1856, the fall thereof. They came up with the only thing they knew how to do. Well, we'll get organized as a county. Then they can't tax us, and the books do not add that. And then attached to us will be Presque Isle and Montmorency and Alcona, and we can tax them. They don't say that in the books, but I imagine the thought went through their heads, you know. So Lockwood, who knew a little bit about law, silver-tongued orator, hied himself down to Lansing, which was quite an undertaking right there, I expect, and convinced the legislators at Lansing that we should become a county. Wasn't anybody here. Nobody at all to speak of, you know. But Lansing said, oh, sure, that's nice. Because, you know, as soon as we get to be a county, then we have to pay taxes to them. You know, everybody's got their hand out. It hasn't changed. And so they gave him a set of books and said, go be a county. So Lockwood came back up and said, okay, boys, here it is. Now we can get organized. Let's see. Rule number 1, have to have an election. In order to have an election, we have to have an electoral board consisting of no less than 3 supervisors from each of the different townships in the county. Well, I mean, here they were, a little handful of people, you know, a few folks out in Thunder Bay Island that didn't want anybody paying attention to them because most of them were ducking from the law. A few folks down in Osneek. P.D. Oliver started a mill down there, but they were busy. They didn't care much about what was happening here. That was about it, you know, just nobody here. Certainly not enough to divide the place into townships already, you know, with so many. You divide it into political townships by according to how much population there is to keep them all kind of even. Forget it. Couldn't obey Rule 1. Back to Lansing goes Lockwood, and said, hey, look, we can't do this, you know. And if we have an election, it won't be an official one and everything, and we want to do things right, but we can't come up with 3 township supervisors. Sorry. So Lansing said, oops, you know. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll appoint 3 of them for you until you get enough folks up there of your own. They didn't want to admit their error and erase the making of Alpena Township, erase that law, Alpena County. So they appointed 3 fellas. Dan Carter, that was a good choice. He'd been here for quite a while. D.D. Oliver at Ossining, and Harvey Hargrove from Thunder Bay Island. Don't know whatever happened to old Harv. He pulled out in the next 2 or 3 months. We didn't tell him down on Lansing. We were operating on 2 for a while till J.K. Miller, Fletcher's father-in-law, got here and filled in that 3rd spot. But we didn't tell them, so they didn't find out about it, so everything's official. It's okay. It was a week later then that they passed the 2nd law in Lansing, amending the 1st law, and February 14th we became a state. We became a county, bona fide. But there again, unique in that we tried to do what wasn't possible, and yet they did it, you know. Strange. We did the same thing when it came to becoming a city. In 1871, we became the city of Alpena, officially incorporated as the political entity known as the city. This is going to get me into a story I hadn't planned to tell, probably. probably still won't. Well, anyhow, there was a fellow by the name of Albert von Molitor up in Rogers City. Do any of you know the story of von Molitor in Rogers City? Is that strange to any of you? I have to be awfully careful. Too many people still alive related to too many other people. You know, really. I have gotten in deep trouble. First lesson I learned in Alpena, don't talk about anybody. You're probably talking to their cousin, you know. Boy, from home already, yes, these people are all related. I found that out. Anyhow, oh dear. Von Molitor rates a whole hour all on his own. Can't get into all of the way I like to do von Molitor. He is said to have been the illegitimate son, and who am I to quarrel? You know, so dandy a story. The illegitimate son of King William of Prussia, of Germany. Apparently, King William was, when he was still a crown prince, was messing around in the court there. I guess they did a lot of that. And nobody paid any attention to the crown prince anyhow, you know. And out of his messing around there came at least 2 children that we know, possibly 3. Von Molitor himself was given the title of Baron, and he had a sister, Carolyn, who later lived in Alpena, Carolyn Clothier. I understand she taught piano lessons to a lot of people back in the 1880s and 90s, and maybe even in the early 1900s. Lived on 2nd Avenue, right near Thunder Bay School. Married to Henry Clothier from home, yet she was a Molitor. And then there was a brother, Edward, about whom we know very little. But we know about Albert von Molitor. If he was the illegitimate son of the King of Germany, he certainly lived his part well, because he acted like he was of royal blood. He set himself up in Presqu'Île County as a king. No 2 ways about it. He was Presqu'Île. He was Rogers City. Forget about that guy, Rogers. He was Molitor's captain in the Civil War. Molitor had been kicked out of Germany. I think it was because Daddy got to be the emperor. You know, there was this big war, and Grandpa died, and so William got to be not just king of Germany, but by this time Germany had eaten up everything in sight, and so it had become an empire, and so he was emperor, no less. Well, he can't have all these little things running around the court, and so they shipped him out, along with the mother, and they were an embarrassment, no doubt, to the royal lineage there. However, they got out of there. They got out, and they ended up in America right before the Civil War. And Molitor fought on the side of the North, fortunately. I'm convinced he was such a tough nut that if he'd been on the part of the South, we'd have probably lost. During the war, he fought under Captain Rogers. So after the war was over, they stayed in the Army as part of the survey team that was going to survey for the United States government the shoreline of Lake Erie. Army engineers. And so they were surveying, and Rogers and Molitor got their eye on a neat stand of hardwood, Presqu'Île County. So they decided after they got out of the engineer, when they finished their survey, they would buy that hunk of hardwood land and start themselves a little town. So they did buy this piece. It became Rogers City. Rogers stayed only 1 winter. That was enough for him. He went back to New York State and married the daughter of Hamilton Fish. And the Fishes are still bigwigs in New York. No way did the daughter of Hamilton Fish, high society in New York, there's still a representative, Hamilton Fish IV from New York today in Congress. Pretty high-toned family. No way was that woman going to come out here to Rogers City to live in the wilderness, you may be sure. So Molitor had bought Rogers out, but he named the town after him because Molitor was in the habit of keeping a low profile. But let there be no mistake about it, he ran Rogers City his way. He developed it, he imported all of the Germans. Most of the people who came up there were at his behest. He advertised in European papers free land. Sure, he gave them the land. He neglected to tell them that he reserved the timber right, and they were farmers. When they came here, they had to cut the timber down, and it belonged to Molitor, so he got all his wood cut. Had to take it to his mill. He had the only mill in town. If they got that far, then they would start farming, and they had to buy everything from him. He had the only store in town. He was also the tax collector, the county treasurer, and everything else in sight by self-appointment. And if they hadn't made it in a year, when he came around to collect the taxes, he was happy to take the land back and sell it to somebody else. I guess those deeds up there bounce around from German to Molitor to German to Molitor 6, 7, 8 times before they get settled down. And they don't get settled down until they manage to get rid of Molitor, which they did in a very unorthodox, flatly illegal way. They murdered him. But Molitor was down here. See, Presqu'Île was attached to Alpena. Remember when we got rid of Sheboygan by becoming our own county, we got attached to us, Presqu'Île County. And as being attached to our county, by virtue of that, they had a right to send a representative to sit on our county board of supervisors, as they were called in those days. And of course, Presqu'Île County sent Albert von Molitor. And then there was a fellow from Osneek, and then there was a fellow from Alpena Township itself, which was most of the county. By that, they hadn't split up too much yet in the county. This was late 1860s. It hadn't split into townships, I should say. Not too many folks had settled out in the boonies yet. They were still right here in the milling town. So there was another fellow, and then the one from Alcona, but he didn't get up here very often. Montmorency, wasn't anybody there at all. They were attached to us too. Molitor owns Lock, Stock, and Barrel. Robinson and Richardson, the other two from Alpena Township. I don't know whether he had something on him or whether he just plain outright bought them. Whatever he said, they did. Molitor got himself appointed as chairman of the County Board of Supervisors from Alpena County. And there were only two other members anyhow. There were he and his two henchmen, and they got into the habit of arranging a meeting, but neglecting to publicize it in time for the other two to get there. But it was still a legal meeting, and the three of them could pass anything they wanted to. They were a quorum. They were passing stuff right and left. A county poor farm for $10,000, which we needed like another hole in the head. There was work for everybody. We didn't have any poor then. There was much more to do than there were men to do it. The $10,000, we never saw it or what happened to that. The contract for the building was given to Richardson. He was a contractor. The land was bought down in Osneek, a piece of Andy swampland that you couldn't use for anything. Anyhow, that happened to belong to Mr. Robinson. Hanky-panky at an early Watergate. One day in 1871, the city fathers here in town went to the County Board of Supervisors and said, we would like this done, and we're told no money. Well, what happened to all the money? They had been so busy making money themselves and building mills and cutting lumber, getting the town going. They hadn't paid any attention to what was happening to local politics, as is our habit, until it's too late. We did it then, we're still doing it. They started looking to see what had happened to the money, and it wasn't very difficult to find out. Molitor had his hand in the till. But it was all legal. He kept himself covered. So they said, how do we get rid of this guy? Well, they got their heads together down there at Evergreen Hall. That was across the river there by Beach's Hotel on Dock Street, North 2nd Avenue. About where the lighthouse is now, cross street from Alpena Candy and Cigar. Just a little hall that Beach had built, the hotel owner that was on that corner had built and let them use as a town hall. And they had this meeting, out of which came this dandy fine idea, how to get rid of Molitor, just as legally and underhandedly as he was behaving toward them. And they did it. And the way to do it was to become a city. We didn't have enough people here, not really, to become an incorporated city. But once again, we got permission when we shouldn't have. But this time it worked out all right. By becoming a city, the city was immediately divided into wards. And there were enough people for 3 wards. 1 across the river and 2 on the south side of the river. And that gave, of course, each ward has a supervisor. So that changed the whole picture of the County Board of Supervisors. 3 from the town, 1 from Alpena Township, and you maybe hear it was a new one. And they elected a new one from Osneek, and Molitor could stay if he wanted to, but he was outvoted as of then. We were on to him, and so he hastily went back up to Rogers City and organized Presque Isle County. Had a good thing going here for a while, but when the heat was on, he turned tail and went back up and did the same thing to them right down the line. I think they're still paying off the debt that he bonded them for. Eventually, they shot him, but that is a whole other story. The farmers of Presque Isle, Mulkey Township, Craco got together and shot Molitor, and nobody found out who did it, not for 16 long years. But some of our good neighbors in Presque Isle County served some time in Jackson for that one. Not too long. They got pardoned real quickly. And Molitor left our history, but he left us with another unique thing. We became a city in 1871 when we had no business becoming a city. A village maybe, but not a city. We weren't quite that large yet. Okay, let's see. What the political process? Right, okay. One of the last places on Huron Shore to be settled. I mentioned Thunder Bay Island, and somebody asked me about Thunder Bay Island, and some place from here, I have the information on Thunder Bay Island. There we are. Ooh, my, that's dated. These are antique radio scripts, 20, 25, 30 years old. Been meaning to redo them. One of those many things I'd be meaning to do, Don't you have a life full of those too? Thunder Bay Island was a going concern for a long, long, long time. There had been boat traffic, of course, between Detroit, Fort Pontchartrain, between Detroit settlement, as it bounced back and forth between Great Britain, first France and Great Britain, then America, then back to Great Britain, then back to America, all through the wars that formed this part of the country, French Indian on through the War of 1812. And of course there was a settlement at Mackinac, and the boats had been tooling back and forth for all those many years. Fine old sailboats, many of which are down at the bottom around here. Many of those old wrecks must go back to those early sailing days. I'm convinced that the Griffin is out here too. The Griffin was LaSalle's boat, you know. And one time, the only time it sailed, it went up and around, as every school kid should know. And LaSalle stayed, sent the boys back. They were to come and meet him again. The boat never made it. It was seen going through the straits, and that's the last they saw it. Some Indians reported that it went through the straits. This little sailboat built in Detroit, the Griffin, her sailboat on the Great Lakes. Never made the trip, never got back down below. Now they claim they've got the bones of that over in Georgia Bay area, over in Canada. What do I want to say? Where? Tocqueville? Huh? No, over in Canada. That's it, Tobermory, around in there, Manitou Island, up around in there. You got a whole museum down there and stuff. This is the Griffin. They can't prove it. They got a real old boat, but I don't think it's the Griffin. I don't see how she'd have gotten over there. That'd be one heck of a storm, took her all the way. That little old bitty sailboat was going to come around the straits and going to hug the shore here real tight. She was going to come right down past Rogers City, probably even come into Thunder Bay, certainly by Thunder Bay Island. That was too little a boat to sail those big waters out there, without the protection ashore, real close by. No way would she go over. She's out here, I'm sure. Somebody's going to find her someday. I just got a hunch she's out here between here and Sheboygan, someplace. I got a real firm hunch that someday the Griffin will be found among those thousands of old wrecks that are down there off our shores even. Well, at any rate, Thunder Bay Island was a going concern because of those sailors, because it was a wooding station, as was Presqu'Île Harbor in the very early days of the 1800s, long before they ever thought of settling Alpena. It is said, there was a little book published, maybe some of you are familiar with it. It's a little book that was written, called The Smugglers of Thunder Bay Island, and it was written back in about 17? I didn't put that down. Anyhow, it was World War I days, by a newspaper reporter of Waldron, who was here working for the Alpena News. And he got interested in the area, and especially in the island, and he apparently researched it quite a bit, talked to a lot of people, and so forth, and got kind of the history of the island, and then wrote this novel based on fact, he said, about Thunder Bay Island. But in it, it's a fairly readable book. It was, I don't know if there are any of the books around anymore or not. Wingus, Bob, have you got one? I know there was one because the whole thing was published in the Alpena News in 1952. It was here then. I didn't take that out of the news. Well, somebody did, and the library downtown has the copies that came out of the newspaper. I keep going down and getting them Xeroxed again and giving them to kids and losing them like crazy. But, and this is a script I wrote off of the Smugglers. The story that he came up with is about a Canadian who had come to Thunder Bay Island, like most folks there had, ducking the law. It was a rule of thumb for an islander never to ask the next guy where he came from or why. Jules Chardin, who was the hero of this book, was said to have left Canada, left his home for the part that he played. The law was after him for the part that he played in the Mackenzie Rebellion. So it's, not that they were all murderers and thieves, but a lot of political problems in Canada at that time, so a lot of them were Canadian, no doubt. But there was quite a colony there, and the story goes on about Jules being a whiskey trader. He claimed to be a fisherman, as they all did, but a lot of them were engaged, apparently, in smuggling Canadian liquor. We were still trading liquor to the Indians for furs in this area in the early 1800s. The fur trade was not dead yet. And that's what Jules Chardin was doing. Everybody wondered why he was getting so many barrels of cornmeal. But inside of about every other barrel of cornmeal was buried a smaller barrel of whiskey, which he would get real cheap and trade to the Indians for furs. And he was doing all right for himself. And I guess he intimated, Waldron did, that a lot of the people on Thunder Bay Island were. Of course, they were doing some fishing, there's no doubt, because they shipped a lot of fish out of there. But he does go on in the thing and tells about the island itself, and the picture he leaves us with is probably pretty true. In 1847, the colony on Thunder Bay Island numbered 40 families, about 170 people. Can you imagine? Nearly all of them were fisher folk. I question that. In the winter, the population usually was reduced by one half. Apparently, a lot of them went home. There were nearly 30 fishing boats, small sloops in use. Traps and seine nets were used, and the fisheries were located at the lower end of the island. That would be close to where the lighthouse is, right? On the west shore, no, that would be on the inside, toward us. and the lighthouse is on the east shore of Thunder Bay Island. They were protected there from the northeast and south from the storms during the fishing season. Then it talks about there was a graveyard there, and some of the stuff that he comes up with is factual. Like in 1832, Jesse Munsey came as the lightkeeper, and that's true. Jesse Munsey played a considerable part in early Alpine history. He was the original lightkeeper on Thunder Bay Island. Talks about D.D. Oliver coming over there and starting a store for 1 year, and that's true. After Oliver got through surveying the country here, he went back down. He got hooked. He wanted to come back here to live. And he went down and used his survey money to buy a store of goods. Brought him back up to Thunder Bay Island and started a store, just in time to get in on the government sweep that cleared Thunder Bay Island. Thunder Bay Island had always been, and still does, belong to the government. And the people who were on it were squatters, but the government didn't care. They didn't want it for anything else. But then one day they decided it was time to build a lighthouse on Thunder Bay Island. So they told the people living there, these fisher folk, smugglers, most of them, that they would either have to start paying high rent or get off. So most of them got off, and there was D.D. Oliver stuck with his store of goods. That's when Oliver came over and bought the mill in 1844 at Osneek, that later became the Sanborn Mill, that a lot of you perhaps were familiar with. The mill at Osneek. Osneek's older than we are. Osneek is 1844, we're 1857. So we're really about the youngest of any of them going, you know, and yet we're the only ones that really survived to any great extent. Osneek, Shingoba Wasanik Goba Wat. See, I can still do that. That's the whole name. I'm glad they shortened it. Shingoba Wasanik Goba Wat. It means images of the divine gods that leave more than one gift. They took the center, Wasanik, out and left us with that, fortunately. Or as people coming to this town, to this neck of the woods, who don't know it, say Siniki, right? Oh dear, now I'm getting way away from it. Oh, I promised to tell you about the social stratification, about a couple of stories. Please kill me. A couple of stories that show you how polarized we were, what a gap there was between the Goths and the also-rans, right? Well, now, Little Eva isn't really one of the also-rans, but what we're trying to do here is get a picture of this town the way it was, and you can't get a picture of this town the way it was without considering the Little Evas of the town. There were quite a group of them. We have mentioned them before. Nancy Noodles, was one of the latter-day Little Evas. We had a lot of that kind of thing going on here, sure. Swinging door saloons every other door downtown. It was part of the town and part of our heritage. What are those horrendous figures? Do they still apply? The beer consumption, whiskey consumption in Alpena is second in the whole nation for towns its size. We come by it naturally. It started out that way. It hasn't changed all that much. Now, I don't know about the Little Evas of the town. I haven't heard lately, but I think that has probably changed. I don't know. Well, anyhow, Little Eva made quite a thing in Alpena, quite a stir, nationwide, as a matter of fact. It all starts with a simple little news note in one of the local columns of the newspaper. I wanted you to see this, and since I'm getting on, Herman, I'm going to walk away. I thought I just happened to have this at home. I got a whole slug of them, but I only brought the one. I brought this one home because I had the whole volume for 1897. That's how I got all the newspapers, and I kept one. They gave me one volume to keep that was a duplicate, because I found a story here about the Sawabic, and I want to ditto that off. And there's another one in here about bicycle riders that I wanted to ditto off too, just to keep. But I thought maybe you might get a kick out of it. I looked for it, but it was falling apart. Now you won't find anything in page 1 is good. Page 2 and 3 are lousy. But then we come to page 3, our telephone. The town talk of the day. And every paper is like this. And we have every newspaper from every week back to 1871. It's crazy here. They are such fun. I was just looking here to see. Let's see. When the flag of our country was unfurled from the tower. Oh no, forget that one. E.O. Avery shipped his horses, Alpha and Thoughtless, Ward Huron. The mail agent, C.L. Whitney, will leave for Detroit this evening. That was the big one for the week right there. Garfield School evidently is not very patriotic, as the balance of our public schools is. We have failed to perceive the national emblem flying in the breeze Monday. If Garfield School is not the possessor of a flag, let it be supplied with one. Next item. Misfortunes never come singly. And this old adage is borne out in the case of William Beatty of Green Township, who suffered the loss of his 18-month-old child last week, and within a few days Even worse, one of his valuable workhorses fell down and broke his leg. Honestly. And then in among all of this are the patent medicine ads for the day, you know, the riot. You can see, you know, that's 1897, that newspaper. Okay, back to Little Eva. So this reminded me, I found a little note like that in the newspaper for 1879, one of the papers, to the effect that it was learned here in Alpena that a woman supposed to hail from the vicinity of Alpena was found in a half-frozen condition near Rogers City. It is said, the paper goes on, that she was attempting to escape arrest. That's all. That's all it said. Well, somehow or other, that little story, that little liner in the paper got picked up and sent to New York. How, I don't know. But there, I mean, we wouldn't make a big deal of that. We had transients by the dozen and Little Eva's by the dozen, as she came to be known. That was not her name. It was not unusual for a woman of that kind to have been kicked out and suffered a little frostbite here and there. It was not unusual to find an item in there. A fellow named Pete found stabbed to death behind York's saloon. Nobody ever knew who Pete was. I mean, there were dozens of people in and out of here like that. And they didn't get, a lot of their backgrounds wouldn't stand investigation, you know. So that was not a big thing for Alpena. But the New York paper got hold of it, and it was around Christmas time, and the editorial writer for the New York, the Herald Tribune, I think, the New York Herald, one of the more yellow newspapers of the day, sensationalism, got hold of it and put it in its Christmas Eve edition under large headlines, "Driven from Alpena." This had been done to Eva Leroy. Not her name at all, he made it up. She fell by the wayside in the bitter cold and lay there in the numb stupor of creeping death. In truth, her feet were slightly frozen. The woman wandered through the darkened, wind-swept wastes, the light of Alpena fading from her eyes. Even the hard words and the stern faces of those who had driven her forth, leaving her brain. At length, the lights of another village appeared, but she fell before she reached them. And it went on and on and on. And then other newspapers all over the country picked it up, and it appeared in other New York papers, but in St. Louis, in Omaha, Kansas City, Alpena, Michigan, well plastered, 1879, all over the papers. What had really happened was then the Argus then picked it up and started carrying it week after week. We could read about it. Eva Leroy was really Agnes Phillips, and she had a couple of other names too. Nobody really knew who she was. Had heard here in Alpena, she was a prostitute. She was doing pretty good here, but she heard that the Alpena law officers were going to clean the town out. They were out to arrest everybody. And so she decided she'd better get out. She hopped the stagecoach for Rogers City. And she got off in Rogers City December 18th, 1878 this was. She didn't die until 79, New Year. She tried to find employment to her liking in Rogers City, but I guess, Molitor was dead by then, because he'd have probably taken her in. He had quite a collection. But she couldn't find any work, unquote, in Rogers City. So she was getting pretty near broke, ran through what funds she had, had a few drinks, slightly inebriated, decided she could walk it back to Alpena. So she started out. By this time it was December 24th. They found her 3 miles outside of Rogers City on her way to Alpena. Her feet pretty well frozen, but mostly because the shoes she had on were too tight. She was wearing her city shoes there. She was taken back to Rogers City. 2 doctors attended her. In spite of the good care they gave her, she did die. Possibly not from being frozen, feet don't kill you, but from her just generally bad condition from having led this terrible life that she had led, right? A little match girl aspect wasn't there at all, but the papers really lived it up. And the part in one of the newspapers, of the city papers, somebody, of course, came up with a poem, the Jefferson County, New York Journal, a poem reminiscent of the face on the barroom floor, entitled The Outcast. It dribbles on tearfully for at least 5 stanzas, and I do not intend to bore you with all 5, but just to show you what did happen, the first lines go like this. Driven out of Alpena, this is New York publishing it, driven out of Alpena to die in the storm, robbed of beauty and virtue, poor Eva forlorn struggles on through the night in the cold winter blast, with a dread of the future, remorse for the past. Brave men of Alpena passed judgment that day, that the frail and the fallen no longer must stay. And the birthday of Jesus with songs full of joy brought the shroud of white snow for poor Eva Leroy. Honestly, all from one little item in the paper. So that's why I have so much fun with the old newspapers, and that's what I did for 20 years after I first got here and found those old newspapers. Spent just about that long laying on my stomach, well, off and on. I had 6 children during that time, but laying however I could, stretching these papers out. They're very delicate, and reading them. And yet I can go through them and read them again now, and I still come up with something different every time. So we had the poor Eva Leroy's and what she stood for, the raunchier side of our town. But then we had that upper social strata. This you won't believe, the New Year's Eve ball for 1889. New Year's Eve, 1889, was undoubtedly, the ball at the Churchill House was undoubtedly the finest and most complete ever given in Alpena. Remember, our population is working up to about 12,000 now. And there were many people in this town, many families who had lots of bucks, quite a few millionaires, no doubt. And this is saying a great deal, for during the past 20 years, many grand balls and social parties of high order have been given in this city by the recognized leaders of Alpena society. The ball included about 60 couples, was a full dress affair. And when they said full dress, they meant it, I'll tell you. The attire for most of the ladies present was listed in this account in the paper in the description of their ball gowns. I had to read it twice. I couldn't believe it. For instance, Mrs. W.L. Churchill wore a corn-colored satin with, and you know, 1889, 18,000 petticoats underneath it all, huge ball gowns, a corn-colored ball gown, and over it, where are you, Miss Churchill? Over it, a lace overdress adorned with pearls and rubies. Mrs. A.W. Comstock, attired in white satin moire, whose lace overdress, complete with a train, was encrusted with pearls and topped off with a few diamond ornaments here and there. Remember, please, 89. Mrs. L.G. Defoe, Lem's wife. He was postmaster here for a while. Don't know what else Lem did. He was a mayor for a while. Yeah, but that's no money in that. I know, for sure. But I think Lem was in real estate. I think he had some lumber going for him, too. But it's his house now that is the Crittenden apartment on Washington, right? Mrs. L.G. Defoe's robin's egg blue satin dress was trimmed in embossed velvet and diamond ornaments. Mrs. Charles Potter had on light blue silk with silver brocade trimmings and diamond ornaments, and on and on and on and on. At the same time, in 1889, L.G. Defoe's robin's egg blue satin dress was trimmed in embossed velvet and diamond ornaments. Mrs. Charles Potter had on light blue silk with silver brocade trimmings and diamond ornaments, and on and on and on and on. At the same time, in 1889, the common folk, 600 of them, were having their New Year's Eve party at the skating rink. We had several skating rinks, indoor skating rinks, you understand. Big wooden buildings, naturally wooden buildings, wooden floors, roller skating rinks these were, big enough to play indoor baseball in. And they were having I bet they had a better time. They were having a masquerade party at the skating rink. The band was under the leadership of Professor Smith, and a good time was had by all, and they gave prizes, 4 of them, for costumes. First, they gave an elegant toilet set to the lady wearing the nicest costume, an elegant water set to the gentleman wearing the nicest costume, a beautiful fan to the lady wearing the most comical costume, and fourth, a photograph holder to the gentleman with the funniest outfit. Yep, Alpena of its day, early on, certainly, and very early, was terribly, terribly stratified socially, definitely. Well, let's see, it's, oh my goodness, I have talked my bloody head off here, and it's 4 o'clock, and time for look at how far I could go. Time for thanks, planetarium. I brought some stuff about Bell because somebody asked me about Bell, the village at Bell, but that's here. I can tell you if you want to know. Is there anything you want me to mention, want me to talk about right now? Any questions? Huh? Yeah, well, all right, go to the planetarium, any of those of you who are planning to go. Okay, Bell. In 1966, there was an article in the newspaper here, which I grabbed out and discovered I only had, it ends with a word. There must have been another page, and I can't find it. It will turn up. About the community of Bell. It was talking about, I think that was just about when Besser had bought the land and with the plans to turn it into a state park, to give it to the state. And now Besser Bell, or Bell Pines, or Besser Natural Area. It is, well, it's officially Besser Natural Area, right? A hiking place, a place where no cars are now permitted, right, down in the hiking trails, and a place they've changed incredibly. Well, I guess that's all right, because to have a natural area is really great, but I wish the village still showed more than it did. Bell Village started in the early 1880s. There was a little town out there now in what is the natural area. As many of you remember, I'm sure, at least you don't remember the town possibly, but you remember the ghost town that was there, the old buildings that one could still see. The state, I understand, went in and tore everything down on the premise that it was to be a natural area and the kids were just going to rip it all up anyhow, so they might as well get them down to start with and let nature take over. And I guess there's some sense to that, but I sure hate to see them do that, you know. Anyway, Bell Village in the 1880s had about 75 to 100 people in it. It was quite a little town, really, about like Alpena was when it began. It had a school and a boarding house and several houses and stores and a saloon, of course, and a large dock and a lumber mill. So it was quite a going little town out there in what is now absolutely nothing. The vessels that docked at Bell Village brought in the groceries and the hardware and clothing, general supplies for the townspeople, and picked up their vegetables and lumber and fish, because that's how they made their living. A fellow lived out there by the name of Rabbitoe, John Rabbitoe, one of the settlers, one of the early settlers. The Kaufmans were close by, but they were over in what is now Presqu'île Village. You know, that was Kaufman's original homestead, Presqu'île Village, where the community center is. Any of you familiar with the little village of Presqu'île? The store and the post office now, like a Birch Hill, and then close by that beautiful little chapel, and then close by the community center. Well, that was Kaufman's second house. He built a real crude house to start with. When he came there to homestead that outfit, he had all of that land between the shores of Lake Esau and the shores of Grand Lake. Boy, that'd be some homestead, huh? And you can still see the apple trees he planted. And the community shelter, his community house there, is the second house that he built real early. But he knew the folks at Bell. They went back and forth a lot. There was a trail, the old Pioneer Trail, down around Lake Esau that went around to Bell. Still does, matter of fact. But it's not one of the main traveled roads. Rabbitoe remembers a little cemetery adjacent to Bell Pines. Remembers it when it was well kept. You can still see the cemetery there in the stones if you know right where to look. He stated that there are about 30 or more bodies buried in this little cemetery. It's a consecrated Catholic cemetery. It has no business being allowed to go into rack and ruin. Joe LeBlanc lived out there. He had 2 children in that cemetery. Mary Clark, her grave was there with a little fence around it until not too long ago. 2 sailors are in that graveyard. They washed ashore from a wreck, and so the folks buried them there. The 2 LaRouche brothers, LaRouche is another Bell name, are buried there. Albert Fulhan, F-U-L-H-A-N, and John McRae, and one of the LaRouche brothers started out in a sailboat one day, and the boat overturned. One of the boys, McRae, stuck to the boat and was saved. One of them drowned. The other one tried to swim for shore and was drowned, so those 2 boys are buried there. This is Pete Riley, has 2 sons buried there. Those are all Bell Pines names. Then there was an Indian by the name of Charbonneau, and he must have been partly French, or he couldn't have had a name like that. Charbonneau lived with his wife just south of the property, on the next point. He wasn't really a part of the original village. He was a very poor Indian with no means of support. One year, Ed Fisher drove a team of horses. While he was working around on the ice, he drowned them. He drove them out onto the ice, and they went in, and the horses drowned. The drowned horses floated around the point to Charbonneau's point, and he and his wife ate them all winter. His son, Pete Charbonneau, worked in the mills, cared for his mother and father in their latter years. One of the Charbonneau girls married a LaRouche boy, and there are a lot of LaRouches still left in town. And Rosie Charbonneau married Charlie Bussey, and they live out in Wilson Township. And we have all the Bussey kids at school, and they are very definitely Indian, of Indian heritage. And I had them in my classes, and I asked them, do you know who your great-great-grandfather was? I didn't tell them about eating the horse, but I told them about this great old Indian fella. And he was. Kaufman talks about old Charbonneau was the only one who could cure anything. He had all the medicines, all the old native Indian medicines, and everybody in Presqu'île depended on him. When the kids got sick, call for old Charbonneau, and he'd come and get some sap out of here and a nut out of there, and he could fix anything, you know. And I think most of that stuff is still better than what we've got, you know. Probably wouldn't give you cancer anyhow. Everything else seems to, huh? Another family that was well known in the area, and a lot of you may know them now, the Riblets. the Riblets, and they're still there. They're back behind the store. Josie is still there, and a sister. Who else is there? The boy, the man is still there, the three of them. Well, the Riblets once operated a sawmill at Bell. The children of the family, Josie, Margaret, Leonard, and Bell. Right. During the time the ducks and geese flew, one of the family, one of the Riblets, always kept a watch. And whenever a flight was observed coming their way, the mill shut down, everybody tore for their guns and shot down the geese. Gus Rabbitoe married Nellie Anchor, had a boathouse and a saloon on the Bell Pines property, just to the left of the entrance road. The saloon, the remnants of it were still there. Rabbitoe's brother Nelson lives in St. Louis, Michigan. He remembers the good old days and told part of this story. Another brother, Frank Rabbitoe, West Long Lake, also tells, part of the history of Bell. Two of the more interesting owners responsible for there being a Bell Pines at all, that only stand of virgin timber in Michigan outside of Hartwick Pines, is Bell, were Henry Bolton, who owned it first. Henry Bolton was a hunter, sportsman, Bolton and McCrae. He was a lumberman here, of course, and a very affluent one. He had a big home in Alpena, right about where, I think exactly where St. Mary's School is now. It was a vacant lot there for a long time. But when I first came to town, there was one big oak tree left in the middle of it. They tore it down for St. Mary's School. That's where Bolton's house was. It had an iron fence around it, it had a fountain in the front yard that Henry kept going all the time, and on top of it was a steel ball bouncing. Everybody in town would go by and look at the steel ball bouncing on the water. You know what happened when they turned the water off? Kerplunk. He had a lot of money, and he bought Bolton Point just for himself because he loved it out there. And always swore he liked to ride horses out there. He would not cut the timber on Bolton Point, though it was fine timber. He said, no, this will always be saved. There was a big fire started in the area, and everybody drove their cattle and horses out to Bolton Point where they'd be safe, and everybody gathered and beat the fire back so that it didn't come down on the point. They saved the timber, which was not easy. Later then, when Henry left this world, E.P. Smith of Alpena, whom some of you may have known, Carrie was still alive when I came to town in the 1940s, I know. E.P. Smith of Alpena, they lived right across from Thunder Bay, big red house on the corner of 2nd and Dunbar, thank you. Manager of Rockport plant for Keller Line. For many years, he acquired stone lands for Rockport, and in the process, he ran into Bell Pines and discovered that it could be bought, Bolton having been deceased. And so he bought for himself, well, I guess the Michigan Veneer Company owned it then, and a Mr. Camel. Anyhow, E.P. Smith got hold of it, and he saved it, too, diligently. John Rabbitoe says he remembers helping build a little beach house for old E.P. Smith. First, there was a house down there on Bolton Point, on the very point of the land. Henry Bolton's house, two-story wooden house, nice house. I broke into it once, nice house in there. Well, Orville Murch gave us the keys so that we could go explore. That was before he sold the land to Besser. And I just can't stand a boarded-up house when there's nobody around. So, between Fred and me, we took the boards off, and we were very careful, and we put them back on. But I had to see the inside of Henry's house. That's all there was to it. I didn't hurt a thing, honest. Didn't take anything either, honest. There were several things I'd like to have had, but I didn't take them. I guess maybe those things are here at the museum now, I understood. Don't know for sure. If they were there when Jesse bought it, I'm sure that's where they ended up. But E.P. Smith lived out there for a long, long time, and he built a barn, had two beautiful cars in it at one time. When Carrie was still alive, there were two cars in that barn. One was a Stanley steamer, and the other one was an ancient vintage, early 1900s, up on blocks, just as good as the day they were born. I don't know what happened to those, but when the Smith died, Mr. Smith died, Carrie sold the property, and it ended up with Orville Murch in control of it. I guess he bought it from the person who had bought it originally from the Smiths, and it was he who interested Besser in buying it and saving it. The property out there, the old village, kind of fell to pieces, but when I was there the last time, before it became a state park, there was some fellow, I'm looking for his name now, who had a general store. The general store was still there. Now I'm going to have a nose red. The general store was still there. It had fallen in from the weight of the snow one year, and nobody ever repaired it. But down inside of the store, inside of this excavation for the store, you could see the safe. So that's another place I went. We couldn't get into it, though. I went down and tried to. But a lot of junk that I wish I had known more about. Things then that I would have taken had I known the state was going to come and bulldoze the whole thing out anyhow. A lot of old tins and things, that would be neat to have. The store just fell in and everything in it fell, and they just let time cover it up eventually. I understand now all you can see, the graveyard you can see, and I guess there's still one chimney left of one of those houses, but not much left to show for a town from the 1880s in which 100 people lived at one time, lived, died, and were buried, and that graveyard should be taken care of. And right next to it is an old Indian graveyard, too. Bones can be picked up on the surface, little scraps of bones. Dan Godfrey showed me a whole bag of them that some fella had collected. As the sands, as the dirt shifts, you know, the graves apparently come up and little pieces of bone can be found. Gory, huh? Terrible. I have no idea. No idea. Is it the shape of the little bay? Could be.
There's still quite a lot of sidewalks if you look under the
Under the junk that's growing over them now, yeah. Yeah, you're probably more familiar with that faith than most of us because you hiked through there and stuff. But it's different now. The trails don't go where the roads did.
The store was still all in one.
To you? Well, the first I saw it was when it was all in its own basement. But then you could see quite a bit.
I thought the house was brick.
There was a brick house out there, but this was the wooden store. Well, E.P. Smith's house? No, it was a wooden house down there in the point of Bolton's old house. Now, E.P. probably built a brick one. Yeah, different, but the original one was a wooden one. I remember it was great, how badly it needed painting, and the big old gray barn out behind it. You know, that big old barn was there for a long time. Those buildings were still there when it became a state park, but the state went in and bulldozed them down, which I think is kind of a shame. And they say that there is a landlocked lagoon. Well, I know there is. Lagoon out there at Bell, just slightly in the natural area, just slightly offshore. I mean, there's a Lake Huron out there, or Bell Bay, and there's a strip of land with trees on it and everything, and then there's a little pond. And down in the bottom of that pond is a 30-foot, about 13 foot of water, a 30-foot sailing boat laying there neatly on its side, highly visible if the sun is right and the waters are calm, and you can see it down there. Don't know where it came from. I suspect that that lagoon was one time part of the lake, yeah, and a sandbar washed up over the years. And that when it was part of the lake, a boat went down there. But I've had kids skin dive on it, and they say it's in remarkably good shape, but there is no sign of identification, no nameplate, no nothing that they could find. But it's an interesting thing to look at, you know, what happened, who did it belong to, where did it come from. Bell. And then there's stories I was going to tell you about Julius Putbun, old Jules Putbun, who started the Alpena House, which is now Kentucky Motor Inn. A dozen more, so we must do this again sometime. But right now, I'm done. Thank you.
You were listening to Ann Tabor talk about Alpena's past. Recorded February 12, 1978.